Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat and welcome to my car. For the avoidance of any doubt, I am parked up with the handbrake on because we do not support distracted driving. I've come to the Isle of Sheppey today to visit what remains of a property that has been described as one of the love nests of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. We're at Shurland Hall, also known as Shurland Castle. Let's go and see what we can find out about it and the part it played in Henry and Anne's story. According to the available information, King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn spent 2 or 3 days together here at Shurland, starting on the 7th of October 1532, as part of a longer and much further reaching trip taken by this couple and their companions to meet with Francis I and his court in France. This was a diplomatic voyage, aimed at smoothing the way for Henry and Anne to marry, but it was also a statement of intent, a clear sign that Henry intended to make Anne the next Queen of England. The whole business reminds me of Anne's short-lived adoption of the motto "Ainsi sera, grogne qui grogne" in December of 1530. It roughly translates to "so it will be, grumble who grumbles." But perhaps it's now worth doing what often happens at the start of a new episode in a TV series and offering a brief rundown of the story so far when it comes to this couple. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour. Henry was born at Greenwich on the 28th of June 1491, almost 6 years after his father's victory at the Battle of Bosworth, which put the Tudors on the throne of England. When Henry came to the throne in 1509, he was only the second Tudor monarch, but one of the first monarchs to peacefully inherit from his father in nearly 50 years. Henry VIII was not quite 18 when he became king. One of the first things he did was marry Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his elder brother, Prince Arthur. They married on the 11th of June, 1509. Their joint coronation took place at Westminster nearly 2 weeks later on the 24th of June. What Anne Boleyn thought or even knew of these events as they were happening goes unrecorded. I suppose that it might depend on how old she actually was in 1509 though. Anne's date of birth is debated, with some scholars suggesting that she was born either in around 1501, potentially at Blickling Hall in Norfolk, or in around 1507, possibly at Hever Castle in Kent. A letter written by Anne in 1514 does, in my opinion, look like the work of a teenager rather than a 7-year-old. I say this because while there is not a blot, it does not display the measured carefulness in letter formation that we see in missives from other preteens from around this period. Whatever the case, this means that when her future husband ascended to the throne then, she was between around 2 to 8 years old. Before long though, England and its king and queen would be across the water from Anne. Her father had obtained a place for her at the court of Margaret of Austria, which was in Brussels in the summer of 1513 when Anne arrived. Margaret wrote gratefully to Anne's father Thomas, as she was so pleased to have Anne at her court. Anne was soon redeployed to France to attend on Henry VIII's sister Mary, during her, as I'm fairly sure Mary saw it, blessedly short marriage to Louis XII of France. Anne would remain in France. She joined the household of the new Queen of France, Claude, in 1515. She might have accompanied Queen Claude to the Field of Cloth of Gold in 1520, and if so, at that point she would have been reunited with the rest of her family, who were serving as part of the English delegation. The peace that was celebrated at the Field of the Cloth of Gold would fracture within months, and France and England were once again on the verge of war by the end of 1521. And so Anne had little choice but to return to England. There were talks of a marriage for Anne with James Butler, heir to the Earl of Ormond. Anne also had other admirers, including the heir to the earldom of Northumberland, Henry Percy, and the courtier and poet Thomas Wyatt. Anne and her sister Mary are recorded as having participated in the 1522 Shrove Tuesday entertainment, The Assault on Chateau Vert. This was staged at York Place. It has been suggested that it was at around this time that Mary Boleyn became Henry VIII's mistress, but as all the details are so sparse, we don't know for sure, nor do we know how long this affair lasted. Henry was in his early 30s. He had been married to Catherine for around 13 years, and they had one surviving child, their daughter, Princess Mary. Catherine's last documented pregnancy had come to an end in 1518, without a surviving child. The following year, 1519, Henry would, at last, become the father of a son who would survive infancy, because his mistress, Elizabeth Blount, had been delivered of a healthy boy who was named, in recognition of who his father was, Henry Fitzroy. In 1525, this little boy was then elevated to the dukedoms of both Richmond and Somerset. These titles were inextricably linked to the Tudor dynasty. Some scholars suggest that Henry did so when he had become convinced that Catherine would not, indeed could no longer, bear him a son. Some even suggest that Henry was already looking for a way out of his marriage by this point at the latest. We aren't sure when the king's romantic interests started to focus on Anne Boleyn. In a letter from Henry to Anne, which is now held, like Henry's other surviving letters to Anne, in the Vatican archives, which is believed to date to the summer of 1527, Henry writes that he had, quote, been now above 1 whole year struck with the dart of love, not being assured either of failure or of finding a place in your heart and grounded affection. Henry, it seems here, is accusing Anne of blowing hot and cold, and maybe she was. Perhaps, though, she had simply been confused by what the king actually intended by this pursuit of her. Maybe she was even frustrated by it. If this letter is to be believed, this infatuation, this pursuit, had been going on from the spring or summer of 1526. Throughout, Anne had reportedly refused to become the king's lover. She would not be another mistress. While there are some who argue that Anne had decided by this point to find a way to become Henry's wife and queen come what may, there are others that suggest that she was simply hoping to put him off, believing perhaps that if she waited just long enough, he might get bored and leave her alone. Either way, Henry was taking action. He began explicitly exploring the potential for an annulment from Catherine in the May of 1527. On the 22nd of June 1527, he had told Catherine that he had concerns about the legality of their marriage. Then, at the end of 1527, a request would reach the Pope. Henry wanted him to grant a dispensation so that if his marriage to Catherine was found to be invalid, he could marry someone, quote, even if she have contracted marriage with another man, provided it be not consummated, and even if she be of the second degree of consanguinity, or of the first degree of affinity, from any licit or illicit intercourse, in order to prevent uncertainty in the succession, which in past times has been the occasion of war. Anne is not explicitly mentioned, but her dealings with James Butler and potentially Henry Percy would be covered by this, as would Henry's relationship with her sister, Mary Boleyn. Henry would, though, not get his papally sanctioned annulment. The legatine court at Blackfriars of 1529 almost certainly would have raised his hopes, and probably Anne's as well, but these hopes would soon be dashed when the court adjourned with no ruling at the end of July. At this point, tensions really frayed. An English petition was sent to the Pope in the summer of 1530. It called for an immediate ruling that was in Henry's favour to avoid, they claimed, terrible damage to the faith and to the nation of England. Before the end of that year, Henry had instructed his agents at Rome to deny the right of the Pope to consider Catherine's appeal to him. This would ultimately become law at the start of April 1533 through what is known as the Act in Restraint of Appeals. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey would carry much of the blame. So much so, he fell from favour, was arrested and summoned for trial. It is believed by many that he likely only escaped execution by dying on his way to London, where he had been summoned to answer the charges against him towards the end of 1530. Henry was recognised as supreme head of the Church of England in as far as the law of Christ allowed in the February of 1531. The 11th of July 1531 would be the last time that Catherine of Aragon would see her husband or her daughter, as per Henry's instructions. Catherine was to be banished from court and from Henry's presence. She was sent to stay at the Moor in Hertfordshire, while the Princess Mary was ordered to remain at Windsor. Although Anne and Henry were not living as husband and wife, she was certainly holding court in very fine state, with an appropriate retinue of servants and companions to accompany her and to serve her. Indeed, this had been the situation for Anne for quite some time, as in around 1528, the French diplomat Jean du Bellay reported that Anne had been given a, quote, very fine lodging near the king. He also pointed out that, quote, greater court was paid to her than had been to the Queen for a long time. We are now in the final countdown for Anne and Henry's stay at Shurland. On September the 1st, 1532, Anne Boleyn was made Marchioness, or Marquess, of Pembroke in her own right, in a glittering ceremony at Windsor Castle. Eric Ives sets the scene. He details how, quote, her hair about her shoulders and her ermine-trimmed crimson velvet hardly visible under the jewels. Anne was conducted into the king's presence by the Garter King-at-Arms. At this point, this was Sir Thomas Wriothesley, who should not be confused with his nephew who bears the same name and who has most recently been depicted in the Wolf Hall series as Call Me or Call Me Wriothesley. She was with the Countess of Rutland. This is Eleanor Manners, née Paston, and the Countess of Derby. This was Anne's maternal aunt, Dorothy Stanley, née Howard, and her cousin, Mary Howard, the Duke of Richmond, that's Henry Fitzroy's prospective wife, carrying the crimson velvet mantle and gold coronet of a Marquess. Henry was flanked by the Dukes of Norfolk, Anne's uncle, Thomas Howard, and Suffolk, the King's brother-in-law, Charles Brandon, and surrounded by the court, with the officers at arms in their tabards, and Le Pommeraye, the French ambassador, as a guest of honour. Anne kneeled to the king, while Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, read out a patent conferring on her in her own right and on her offspring the title of Marquess of Pembroke, placed on her the mantle and coronet, and handed her the patent of nobility. This honour was surely made all the sweeter for Anne due to the value of the lands that were granted to her alongside it, which would earn her £1,000 a year for life. In modern money, that is the rough equivalent of more than £440,000 a year. In addition to being a mark of the esteem that Henry held for Anne, raising her to the rank of Marquess of Pembroke, the rank just below a duchess, or indeed, perhaps more properly, as she holds this title in her own right, that of a duke, gave Anne the appropriate status for the journey she and Henry were about to make to the court of the French king, Francis I. Henry was going to make it clear that Anne was, in effect, the queen in waiting. He was going to make sure that she was the equal or the better of every other woman who would form part of the upcoming French trip. In the aftermath of this, she outranked her brother, who had become Viscount Rochford in 1529, but also her father, who had become the Earl of Wiltshire and Ormond at the same time. There is a letter dated to the 1st of October 1532 from the Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuis to his master, the Emperor Charles V, the nephew of Catherine of Aragon, the wife that Henry was trying to set aside to leave him free to marry Anne. Among other details, this letter sets out some of the preparations that were being set in motion for this trip to France. How Anne had, quote, not been slack to provide herself with rich and most expensive dresses and ornaments, which the king has ordered to be brought for the occasion. After sending her his own jewels, the king has, I hear, lately given the Duke of Norfolk commission, and he has come down here on purpose to procure through a third person those belonging to the Queen, who, I am told, said to the bearer of the royal message, cannot present the king with my jewels as he desires, inasmuch as when, on a late occasion, I, according to the custom of this kingdom, presented him with a New Year's gift, he warned me to refrain from such presents in future. Besides which, she said, it is very annoying and offensive to me, and I would consider it a sin and a load upon my conscience if I were persuaded to give up my jewels for such a wicked purpose as that of ornamenting a person who is the scandal of Christendom and is bringing vituperation and infamy upon the king, through his taking her with him to such a meeting across the Channel. Yet, continued the Queen, if the king sends expressly for my jewels, I am ready to obey his commands in that as well as in all other matters. That order from the king would be promptly issued, upon which the Queen gently pleaded excuse for her former refusal and sent him the whole of her jewels. And the king, as I am given to understand, is very much pleased and glad at it. Chapuis also reported that the king was due to set off for France on St. Francis Day, which falls upon the 4th of October. The ambassador continues, quote, "It appears that avoiding Rochester and other towns on account of the plague, and because people are there dying of it, the king will go from Greenwich to Gravesend in his state barge, then to the house of a gentleman, where he will stay 1 day, and then on board a well-appointed ship of 150 tons called La Mignon, and in fact more than deserving this name if her strength be taken into consideration. The Mignon will then sail for a small island on the Thames, where the king intends to feast and carouse for 3 consecutive days at the manor of a gentleman of his bedchamber named Chenet. Thence the king will go by land to Canterbury and Dover, at which last he will again embark on the said ship La Mignon, calculating upon reaching Calais on the 15th of October. That gentleman of his bedchamber named Chenet is a reference to Thomas Cheney, who had been made a Knight of the Body in 1515. This made him a trusted and intimate member of the king's household, one of his personal attendants. The small island on the Thames is the one we're standing on, Sheppey, where Cheney built his new house. This one, Shurland. Thomas Cheney was born in around 1485. He was a distant relative of Anne Boleyn's on her mother's side, but he marked himself out at the English court on his own merits before Anne had even returned. In his early to mid-20s, he joined the royal household, firstly serving Henry VII and then Henry VIII. His name appears in the list of those who participated in court tournaments in 1510 and 1511. He became Constable of Queensborough Castle in 1512. He was knighted by the end of 1513. In that year, he was also put in command of a ship for the war with France. In 1515, he was welcomed as a close companion of the king in his household as a Knight of the Body. More awards and preferments would come his way going forward too. He was made variously Constable of the Castles of Rochester, 1525, Dover, 1536, and Saltwood, 1540. He held multiple roles of authority in Kent. He was, for example, sheriff there from 1515 to 1516 and a Justice of the Peace in Kent from 1526. He was trusted by his king to act as a diplomat. His skill for languages, for French in particular, would be remarked upon during this period. In 1514, he was sent to Pope Leo X, but, as Stanford Lemberg points out, quote, his principal activity, as it turned out, was to supervise an exchange of horses sent by the Marquess of Mantua as a gift to Henry VIII. In 1528, though, Cheney did find himself in hot water and on the receiving end of the king's displeasure. He had become involved in a quarrel over the wealthy heiress Anne Broughton. Now, Anne Boleyn gets part of the credit for bringing about a reconciliation between Henry VIII and Thomas. And this is evidenced in the fact that Thomas is the recipient of a gift from his king at New Year 1532. And then, of course, he's given the honour of hosting the couple at Shurland later in the year. It has been suggested that Cheney expanded his house here in preparation for this visit. The royal court descending upon your home was both incredibly valuable, evidence of royal favour that may hint at further profitable promotion, but also devastatingly expensive, as the homeowner would be responsible for accommodating the hundreds of people with places to sleep, food to eat, and entertainment to enjoy. If this court didn't feel well hosted, it may all have been for nothing. Thomas is thought to have built this house on the site of an earlier medieval building, likely the 13th century manor of Sir Robert de Shurland. When it comes to the 16th century building, the largest surviving element is the gatehouse. The National Heritage List for England explains that it, quote, is complete to parapet level The gatehouse is of 2 stories with 3-storey octagonal corner towers. It stands on a stone plinth but is otherwise of red brick with stone dressings. The towers are looped but chiefly for ornament. The gatehouse range and towers had stone castellation, but this has largely been lost with the exception of the east wall facing the courtyard. Original fenestration also remains on the east elevation of the gatehouse, consisting of 2 light windows under a square headstone. The gatehouse was originally freestanding. The blocks to its north and south are infill. The entrance is a 4-centred arch, dressed in stone, which aligns with the entrance of the main house. The timber doors, studded in iron, survive for both gates. In the west wall, the window by the gate is formed by the partial blocking in stone of a former pedestrian door. When first completed, the infill blocks would have had stone-dressed windows similar to those on the east elevation. An image showing how the site may have looked during the Elizabethan period depicts a series of courtyards that are grouped together. In addition to the gatehouse, there would have been numerous rooms for esteemed guests, also a hall and/or gallery for dining, entertainments, or simply walking about in. This Tudor gatehouse is similar to other surviving examples like those that are seen at Hampton Court Palace and St James's Palace. Notice here the diaper work, those black diamond patterns that we can see here that are also present at Hampton Court. These are produced through the use of vitrified bricks, essentially bricks that are baked or cooked for longer to make them appear black. Perhaps, as is the case with Hampton Court, these bricks, whether red or black, would have been painted to appear a deeper shade of the colours they are. We believe that many Tudor buildings would almost have looked like illustrations of themselves. The Spitalfields Trust acquired this building in 2006, at which point it was, quote, roofless and unsafe. The Trust explained that it was, quote, altered in both the 18th century, when large sash windows were inserted, and again in the 19th century. It had stood empty and unused since World War II. The site, which is a scheduled ancient monument, includes 7 acres of grounds with substantial 16th century stone and brick garden walls, and the stone remains of the medieval Great Hall itself. The Trust, following encouragement by Simon Thurley, the then chief executive of English Heritage, and supported with a generous grant from English Heritage and a loan from the Architectural Heritage Fund, set about repairing and restoring this building both outside and in. We are informed that, quote, the works undertaken included the reconstruction from old photographs of the 3 paired stacks of decorative brick Tudor chimneys, rebuilt by Emma Simpson, who had worked on similar chimneys at Hampton Court Palace, as well as the rebuilding of a wooden mule staircase in one of the turrets, and the insertion of an 18th century staircase from a demolished house in Hatton Garden, London. In recent years, a metal detectorist working near to here uncovered a gold and enamel signet ring that featured the head of a bull with panels on either side of that bull, featuring the Virgin and Child on one and St. Catherine of Alexandria on the other. This ring is believed by some to date to the 15th or early 16th century. It was subsequently acquired by and displayed at Hampton Court Palace. The team there state that this is a man's ring, which seems to have an engraved reversed R between the bull's horns, which leads them to conclude that it might have belonged to Anne Boleyn's father Thomas or her brother George. The bull was, after all, an animal that was certainly found on the arms of the Boleyn family. The R is thought to link to the Viscount Rochford title, which Thomas Boleyn held until he was raised to the earldoms of Wiltshire and Ormond in 1529, at which point his son, Anne's brother George Boleyn, became Viscount Rochford instead. However, this attribution of this ring to the Boleyn family is not without its critics. Dr. Lauren Mackay points out that the bull's head and or bull's horns also connect to the Cheney family because, quote, Thomas Cheney's uncle John Cheney fought for Henry VII at Bosworth and was granted the use of a bull's head / bull's horns for his crest. John Cheney then served as a personal bodyguard to Henry VII, which meant he would have been allowed to wear the Tudor livery, green and white, which may explain the flecks of green and white found on the ring. The Boleyns used red, black and white. Back to the 1532 French excursion though. Chapuis does seem to have got some of his details wrong in his letter to the Emperor, or perhaps simply plans changed. Firstly, the royal party arrives in Calais on the 11th of October rather than the 15th, which is what Chapuis offered as the latest date they'd get there. There's also no mention of the ship La Mignonne. Instead, they sailed, it seems, aboard the Swallow. As there was a, shall we say, paucity of noble French ladies available, or perhaps more properly, willing to play a part in recognising Anne as the rightful future Queen of England, some of the plans they had in mind did have to be altered. Anne would meet Francis for the first time since she had been in service to his wife Claude on Sunday the 27th of October at a banquet that Henry VIII hosted for the delight and entertainment of Francis in the English territory of Calais. Eric Ives reminds us that, quote, Anne had a sense of theatre. It was after the dinner, and its 170 different dishes, prepared alternately in French style and English style, that she made her entry, leading a masque of 6 ladies gorgeously apparelled. They wore costumes of strange fashion, loose gold-laced overdresses of cloth of gold, with sashes of crimson satin ornamented with a wavy pattern in cloth of silver. They were masked, and they were escorted by 4 maids of honour in crimson satin and tabards of cypress lawn, lawn being a thin kind of linen, presumably this coming from Cyprus. Each chose a Frenchman to dance with. Francis himself was, of course, claimed by Anne. Henry and Anne would not receive that fulsome continental backing for their union that they had presumably hoped for, but that, ultimately at this point, would not slow them down. Bad weather kept this couple and the court they had travelled with in Calais until the 12th of November. Even when conditions improved enough for them to sail, it would take them nearly 30 hours to reach Dover. Most scholars agree that it was during this trip, perhaps during that long wait to leave Calais, that Anne and Henry finally, after years of waiting, slept together, quite possibly following a private betrothal ceremony before witnesses. It is believed that Henry and Anne then had a secret wedding back in England on the 25th of January 1533, by which point Anne was almost certainly already pregnant, as this couple's daughter Elizabeth would be born on the 7th of September 1533, and there is nothing to indicate that she was not full term at the point of her birth. Thomas Cranmer, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, was consecrated on the 30th of March 1533. Then, at Easter, on the Holy Saturday, which was the 12th of April, Anne went to Mass, recognised as Queen of England. On the 10th of May, the trial of Henry and Catherine's marriage was opened and overseen by Cranmer. The final ruling was ready on the 23rd of May. Despite more than 2 decades, as it turned out, Catherine was not, apparently, Henry's lawful wife. On the 28th of May, the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn was deemed and pronounced to be lawful. The next day, Anne travelled by barge to the Tower of London to celebrate and to await her coronation, which took place on the 1st of June. On that day, there was a royal procession through the streets to Westminster, where Anne was crowned with St Edward's crown, which by custom was used to crown monarchs, usually, not their consorts. Just under 3 years later, though, Anne returned to the Tower by barge. As had happened before, the cannon would have sounded to indicate that a royal person had arrived there. Anne stayed in the rooms, we think, that had been refitted to her honour previously. She was put on trial in the Great Hall there, the hall in which she had earlier celebrated her triumph. She was convicted of treason, and on the 19th of May 1536, she was beheaded by sword in the Tower. Many of her faction fell with her. The 5 men, George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford, who was Anne's brother, Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton and Mark Smeaton, had been executed on Tower Hill 2 days before Anne died. Many others would lose everything but their lives. But this was not the case for Sir Thomas Cheney. He quickly moved under the protection of Thomas Cromwell, and on the day that George and those other men were executed, he rose to take George's place as Warden of the Cinque Ports. Through the dissolution of the monasteries, royal favour saw him expanding his holdings here on Sheppey to include the site of the Minster Nunnery. And this was in spite of the religious conservatism that he reportedly exhibited. Cheney served Henry for the rest of the reign. He made arrangements for Edward VI's coronation. He was a signatory to the letter that was sent to Mary Tudor that asserted that Jane Grey was in fact Edward's rightful heir. This was a stance, though, that he did walk back pretty swiftly, as he was also among those councillors who declared for Mary on the 19th of July, 1553. Mary allowed him to keep his offices, as did her half-sister Elizabeth when she came to the throne on the 17th of November, 1558. Thomas would, though, not see much of this new reign, as he fell ill and died on the 16th of December, 1558. He would have been around 73 years old, and technically, he had served every one of the Tudor monarchs. So, what do you think of Sir Thomas Cheney, of Shurland, and of what remains, and what once might have been? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. I'd also love it if you'd pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, get the video shared out more, and help us, hopefully, to grow our community. I'm thinking we pick something stately home-ish, maybe something Tudory. Let me know why you've picked what you've picked in the comments as well. You can also find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. If you like the channel, let some pals know about it. You can talk about this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you think you are subscribed, have a check now, just to make sure you're not mysteriously unsubscribed against your will. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop-down that will appear, and that way YouTube claim they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next going to go live, which I do about once a month to talk about the history news. It's a good time. You aren't going to want to miss it. We have, of course, got our failsafe. If you head over to my website, which will be linked, it is www.katrinamarchant.com. Go to the contact page and put your email address in the box and then hit sign up. That will add you to my list and will allow me to send you out an email once a week so I can tell you what I've been up to and also send you useful links for my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.